For the next session, we have Aakanksha and Rohit, and I would like to invite Akash, who is a 2018 pass out from an ITW, for the session of academic research in the United States of America. He is currently pursuing his doctoral studies at the University of Michigan. Over to you, Akash.
Hey everyone, so as Ashwin said, my name is Akash, and yes, I am a doctoral student, and this is way too early for me, so don't mind me if I just go rambling on. But so I just want to tell you all that we have absolutely amazing speakers lined up for this session on academic research in the United States. And to that end, I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Aakanksha Jain from the batch of 2012, who's currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the Boston Children's Hospital. So Aakanksha, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, I have not attended the earlier talks, but I'm assuming I just have to go through what I've done in life, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I started my PhD, BTech 2008. We were like in the third batch, so there was not enough exposure to what people do after that. But we had good seniors, so I talked to a lot of people. And I think knew I wanted to do a PhD. I just like knowing a lot of things and frankly showing off, which PhD allows you to do that. So I came in knowing that I will take GRE and I will not do sit for placements or anything else. I will not do CAT, whatever other people were doing. So I was pretty focused on that angle. So I did GRE third year, I think, and then people apply for internships. Everyone was doing it, so I did that too. I got like one, it's called something in Canada, my tax or something. I wanted to, and then I also applied for DART, which I did not get, but I really wanted to go to Germany. So I just went to Germany. So another reason I just want to say, maybe there are more internship opportunities for you guys, and if you get into more than one, like talk to people who have been through those and see what they liked. So for me, I did not have exposure, but for MITAX, there was like this very structural thing where you have the lab is assigned to you, and then you have 2 weeks of industrial experience. And it was just so structured for me. I did not want that. So even though in Germany, I did not get any funded internship, I just asked my dad to pay for it, which I understand is not, it's a privileged thing, but I did not go to Canada. I went to Germany, which in hindsight was a good decision because I just did whatever I wanted to do. I talked to a lot of people. I had no commitments time-wise. So I went to Heidelberg, German Cancer Research Center. I did, I think, 6 to 8 weeks of internship. I was barely productive. So don't try to go to internship and be like, oh, I'm going to have a paper out of this. Just talk to a lot of people, hang out. If it's Europe, definitely check out cities. I don't know when you'll go next. And then I applied for a PhD and master's program. So I knew I wanted to do a PhD, but it's difficult to get into PhD. That's what people told me. So I did apply to 1 or 2 master's program and a bunch of PhD programs. And so when you're trying to make a decision of which universities you should go to, you will definitely apply to some of them because your seniors are already there. You have some insider scoop. And then if it's a master's program, look into tuition, how much you can afford. I applied to a lot of them because they were cheaper almost, right? So I went to UT Southwestern for my PhD. And honestly, I applied there because there was no application fee. So, and then later on, I realized that it was a good school and I was interested in immunology, and they had the Nobel Prize in immunology that year. So it was top 10 immunology programs that year. So it just worked out that way. And then some American schools, they will have this umbrella program, so you don't have to commit to like biochemistry or cell biology. So again, if you don't have any research experience, these umbrella programs, you can rotate in different types of labs. So UT Southwestern had umbrella programs, so I tried that. And then I ended up joining immunology, which is what I wanted to do from the beginning. So that's what I did for 6.5 years. PhD is long, so know that it can be a long commitment. So if you do not want to commit, do a master's, and if you really want to do research, then do PhD. But it worked out for me. I really wanted to do PhD, so I did that. And I graduated in 2019. And now I'm a postdoc. So I decided I want to continue in academia. So eventually I want to run my own research program. So you do an academic postdoc, and then try to apply for tenure track positions. Just the one big decision that you have to make at the end of PhD is, of course, if you want to do research or not, but even if you want to do research, do you want to go back to India or not? Because all of us have families back in India, and that becomes honestly the biggest decision you have to make. So everyone has it, and this is almost like a personal choice. I know when I started, India did not have that much research ecosystem going on. But by the time I was finishing, there were like a lot of institutes that run similar to US and European countries. And some of my friends have labs there now. So like keep your mind open. Like if you want to go to Europe for a lab, or have your own lab, or India or Singapore or Japan, like talk to a lot of people. For me, I mean, my husband ended up making the decision for me. He wanted to stay here. So I stayed here. And so now I'm doing a postdoc at Boston Children's. Oh, I should mention that in terms of research, I did basic science, like studied pathways of inflammation when I was doing PhD, and now I'm doing neuroimmunology. So I study how immune system talks to the peripheral nervous system. So I'm like trying to get more specialized that way. So that's the story. If you have any questions, I can elaborate.
So we have 2 more minutes for questions. I think that was a question in the chat from Nandini, which talked about GRE scores and whether giving the GRE at this point, when GRE scores are optional in a lot of universities, does it even make sense?
Yeah, so this is the new trend here. People don't want numbers. Honestly, it's because Indians do so much better, Indians and Chinese at GRE, and Americans don't. I still would recommend take it because in my profile, GRE was the only strong point, or my GPA. So you don't really have many things going for you. So if you have a perfect quant score and a good score in TOEFL and GRE, like that kind of shows that you are a capable person. You won't have much going for you. So it's expensive, I get that. So if you can afford it, take it. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I don't have much to comment on that. Like when I took GRE, GREs were still in like being scored on 1600. So like, that's like ancient right now. So yeah.
Alrighty, if there are any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will discuss them in the discussion panel after the second speaker. And that alludes to me introducing our next speaker for this session, which is Dr. Rohit Kongari from the OG batch of biotechnology in 2010, who is currently a postdoc fellow in the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the FDA. So you might have heard of the FDA. So, yes.
All right. So it's about 9 o'clock for me, 9 a.m. for me. And like, I'm the first coffee that I drank is just kicking in, like, and I knew like I wasn't going to have all my thoughts in place like all the other speakers so far have done. So like, that is why I actually prepared this presentation. Bear with me, like, it will be short and I'll get it done quickly. So yeah, are you guys seeing the presentation right now, or like, just want to make sure?
Yeah,
I'm
it's really
sharing the screen. So yeah. There will be some nostalgia posts also. Maybe Krishna Das can relate to these. But so getting started with, yes, I was in the class of like 2006 to 10 batch. So we were the first graduating class. As it has been overused, I think already. I also started in the department. It wasn't by choice, but like eventually became the choice. During my BTech, like the different internships that, or like trainings that I did. The first one was like a week-long training at AP Forensic Labs. That was the first time that we ever extracted DNA and stuff. Then I did a week-long internship at Biological E during the summer of 2008 that officially on paper got written as a 2-month-long internship. Then I was a summer trainee at CCMB in summer of 2009. Which was where, again, like just like Saitya said, that for her, like that was a turning point. For me, the CCM internship was the turning point where I decided, all right, I definitely want to do research. So there is this one point, I don't know if this loophole has been fixed, still fixed or not, but back then IIS didn't have any cutoff that like you can't do a fellowship after you graduate. So I actually applied to IIS to see if I could get through, and I did actually get through. So after graduating, like the summer of 2010, I did an internship at TIFR in Kolaba, Mumbai. I also did apply for that and like got one, but like then I realized that like if I had to get a visa and everything here in India, like going for a summer internship during that time wasn't going to work out for me. So after NITW, so I knew that like I wanted to do research. So I obviously applied for as in like wrote GRE and TOEFL. Back then, like I think those were decent scores, and I applied to 6 different schools, all of them PhD programs. So at this point, basically, I had already had a job offer from Cognizant. So my dad was like, "You are a graduate of NIT Warangal. You have a job. I don't see any reason in paying for your education any further. So like if you want to go for your higher studies, it's up to you, but like you'll need to figure out your own." So I was applying to only programs where like I knew I would be getting full funding and all. But so being the first class, we had no idea like on how to choose universities and all. So I applied to all what like in NITW language we would call them as top schools. Like these are all like UC Berkeley, Wisconsin Madison, like just all the top ones. Like I didn't even consider the fact whether I would get in or not. But so I did get a job, get an admit from Carnegie Mellon University. But even though I applied for a PhD program there, they offered me a master's program admit. And then luckily, somehow, literally on the last day of, I think the last exams, I got an admit from Texas A&M. And during that time, I also wrote GATE, like, just to see if I could get into a PhD program in India. But surprisingly enough, I did a JRF interview, Junior Research Fellow at CCMB, and I couldn't get through that interview. It was kind of tough. So during this process, I did learn a few lessons. One of them is that applying to PhD is quite a lengthy process. Like you will need to have patience and you will need to plan for months. Like there will be times where you have applied, like for example, I applied to A&M on December 1st, like that was the deadline. And I didn't hear back from them until April 24th. So that was like long process and like you need to wait. So, and also planning, like, when are you going to give your tests and like, making note of deadlines and all that. It is like you need to be properly planning all that. Then choosing universities smartly, like do not do like what I did, just don't apply for all the top ones. There's usually, I think later what I learned is that you always want to go for 2 ambitious ones, 2 safe ones, and like 2 ones that for sure like you're going to get through. um, and then also while you're choosing your programs, I think location does matter. I've had like I know people who didn't like their programs because of the weather that they were in. Then also the cost of living. So usually so I did my PhD from Texas A&M, which is College Station. It was a small town, and like I didn't have to worry too much about cost of living. But if you're going to say California or New York, then like your cost of living is going to be too high. Then also like when you're actually halfway across the world, I think like having someone close by, be it a friend, be it a family friend or a relative, does really help. uh, then I don't know about other, as in like Germany and all, but in the US, the way the PhD admissions work is that if you are here on US soil, there is a chance that you might actually get you might get called to the university for an in-person interview after when you apply for a PhD. So there's this option of like you want to, if you want to get into a PhD program at a very reputed school, then like actually joining a master's at like not so competitive school and then going for a PhD interview might be something that you want to consider. It all comes down to on paper versus in person evaluation. Then I think international internships definitely do add a huge benefit to your resume. And then again, getting the admit is just the beginning, because then you have to actually put together all the paperwork, getting your visa, then figuring out your ticket, everything. Like as in this is just the beginning. And this is where I think talking to peers and seniors who have gone through this process or who are going through this process actually helps. And then I just wanted to highlight this one problem for US grad applicants, which I think Aakanksha can also probably relate to, is that we get this thing called as 221G administrative processing. So if you're in biofield, they always do a security background check, which delays your like visa approval process by anywhere between 30 to 90 days. So if you're planning on like, joining your school by say August or something, you want to plan your visa interview earlier. And again, with this COVID times, I'm not sure totally how all that is going to work out. So at Texas A&M, so if you are surprised with Aakanksha's 6.5 years, I beat her by like, 1.5 year more. So I was there from August 2010 to August 2018. But so the reason why it wasn't, so it might look as 8 years, but like, the way it works in our program is a little different. So the first year you actually we did like 4 rotations in different labs to choose the final lab. So like we weren't even doing anything with regards to our own work until the end of first year. And then you had a qualifiers to figure out if you would still survive in the PhD program or you would get a master, like basically getting politely kicked out with a master's. And then we also had a mandatory teaching assistantship in the second year. And then prelims at the third year, which make you a doctoral candidate. So at this point, like one advice that I would like to give out for anyone, like, if you have the option of actually going through something similar, and if you have to choose your lab, like, I was told this idea of 3 Ps that like, I would like to tell others too, is that like, you need to love your project that you're going to work on. You need to have a really good relationship with the professor that you're working under, and then the people around you, like your lab mates are going to be like a big asset, like big help for you anyway. So and so in US usually there are PhD committees that evaluate your progress. That's like your PI or prof plus like 2 departmental faculty and 1 external faculty. Sometimes this is from the university, sometimes this is from outside the university. And so the money question, right? Like a lot of you might be wondering how much do PhDs actually earn. So when I started with $24,000 per annum as assistantship, and then eventually throughout the 8 years, like I survived long enough to see an increase of $4,000 per annum increase in salary. And over there, I worked on bacteriophage lysis. And so these are viruses that kill bacteria. I had a wet lab component, but also a very strong bioinformatic component to my project. During that time, so as a PhD student, you will be expected eventually to train undergrad researchers or have like, people working under you as well. So I had to do that. And then I actually did TA at the end of my PhD because eventually there were funding issues coming up. I did TA for 2 additional semesters at the end. That like, so when you're teaching at the end, when you're actually trying to also finish up your PhD, it does like, get a little hectic. So I think it did add like a year or something for me. But then, when I get to the publications, I'll explain it. So publications, I think again, are more of a lab choice, as in like, do you need a publication to graduate or not, is more of a lab choice. But in our lab, it was like, as long as you have one first author paper, you were good. Luckily, I had 2 and I had 1 second author paper. But then one of the classes that I taught towards the end of my PhD was a genomics class that allowed me to also get like these 15 phase genome announcements. These are not really like research papers, full research papers, but these are still considered publications. So like I was willing to give away that, like, or take an additional year to get those 15 papers under my belt. So like that was kind of a thing that I was ready to do. Then I also had a second author paper from an interdisciplinary collaboration. This was literally like a chat over beer that had eventually turned into a paper. And obviously, like, you will be expected to present at different meetings. So I participated in local, national, and international conferences. So during this time, obviously, there are like a lot of time, so a lot of lessons learned. Research does not really progress as you expect it to. Like, so I still remember what I wrote in my prelims proposal, that like what I would be doing, but like I ended up doing something totally different. and you want to choose a field that you have the patience for. So like I worked with bacteria. So like my experiments were essentially like a day-long experiment. At the most, they would be 2 or 3 days. But say if you're working with plants or something, then like you'll be setting up your experiment and then your result will be like probably like 6 months down the line. So like you want to choose a field that you will have the patience for. And then the value of death. So this is something where like I think all the PhD people here will know, is that like there will be a point in your PhD where you will question yourself, is this PhD worth it or not? Or like do I want to just get out with a master's? But like you just want to like perseverance and resilience is the key at that point. You just, and having a support system around you does really help. And another thing that I really like developed throughout my PhD is that don't just read papers, actually critically analyze them, see what's they're missing and all. And then writing is as crucial as performing research. I think for me that was like a biggest hurdle, like eventually for finishing up, and practice as much as possible. And I also realized that there are a lot more career paths than just industry and academia. Like at least when I started PhD, I thought it would either be academia or industry, but like then I learned science policy, patent lawyers, industrial consultants. There are a lot of issues, a lot of options. But then irrespective of all these options, I think networking is really important. So make yourself visible. Do not hesitate to market yourself, especially during PhDs, towards the end of your PhD. And like participating in conferences, department socials and all will like really help in that. So after that, I knew that like I wanted to enter academia. Like I wanted to do something eventually. Like so, even right now, my goal is to come back to India, set up a lab where like I can do both teaching and research. So I wrote to about 15 profs at the end of that. Got interviewed by 4. I had options from John Hopkins and FDA, but the others didn't work out. But so this is where it gets tricky in the US, is that understanding US, like the immigration rules over here. So after you finish your degree, you have something as an optional practical training period, which is like a 90-day period. Which is a 1-year period where you can work without having to change your visa. And if you are in a STEM degree, then you can actually work for 3 years while still being on your student visa. But then there is also a 90-day limit for unemployment. So you can't, during that STEM OPT period or OPT period, you can't have more than 90 days of unemployment. So I eventually joined as a postdoctoral fellow at FDA because um, for me, it came down to whether I wanted to join a postdoc and get a J1 visa, or like I could get an H1 as a contract scientist at the FDA. So right now I am on a H1 visa. And I think like I'll talk about these later if like we need to go into that detail about how the employment through federal contractors works and all. But so right now I'm working on understanding the potential of phage therapy at FDA. It's a new upcoming area, so like they're trying to figure out how to regulate it. So I started at $65,000 per annum salary, which is considerably higher than what is the NIH stipulated postdoc salary, which is around I think 55 to 58. But then like I had a government shutdown of 36 days immediately after I started, and now the COVID shutdown. So I haven't really, I think, progressed much in terms of work. A number of what I was surprised is that like a number of Indians and internationals actually work at the FDA, but getting into the thing is still like quite a process. In terms of differences between grad school and all, FDA, what I found was that it is not a traditional academic lab. The funding and everything works a little different. The workload was very less. The time commitment was very less compared to grad school. There weren't enough, as in, like there weren't major money restrictions, but there was a lot of paperwork and red tape because I was working with in a federal lab. So with that, I think like if you are at the end of where like your PhD and now deciding how to go for a postdoc, these are the questions that you want to ask, like what new tools or techniques you are going to learn from the postdoc. And most importantly, if you do plan to set up your own lab eventually, I think the thing is like what future questions or projects can you take from your postdoc to set up your own lab? And then publications eventually, like if you do want to get into academia, I think matter. So what number and what quality you can get. Then a few people go for multiple postdocs, like they know that they can get like as 1 or 2 year postdoc done quickly somewhere, and then do a larger one where like they actually focus on something. And then what kind of recommendations you can get from them. And then if you are someone like me who's like planning to get back to India, then you have to think of like what fellowships you want to apply, when, and like where to move and all those things. And this is the end. I just want to end it with giving a shout out to this community on Facebook called STEM Peers. I would encourage everyone to join that group. There's a lot of it's basically a group of researchers from all over the globe, but like mostly Indian. And they have a lot of information about for people who want to come back to India. Like they conduct events like Return to India, ROI, and then there are a lot of information about Department of Biotechnology initiatives as well. So yeah, that was.
Awesome. Thank you so much for such a detailed talk. That was really helpful. I think we had a question in the chat from Deepshika, who asked about if research for international people at such sort of national institutes are restricted for like safety purposes or security purposes.
So if you're asking about the FDA, so getting approved for that is takes a lot of time essentially. So you need to undergo a security background check. Like I moved to Maryland in like probably the first week of November, but I eventually could get an ID and get started working only 45 days or something. So that 90-day employment period that I was talking about, I was actually unemployed for 45 days because of the process that was needed to for me to get cleared to start working. So you can work, but there is like a lengthy process that is required for you to get started.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a question for both the speakers, whoever wants to answer both. So as it's very aware, grad school comes up with a lot of mental health issues because you're coping up with the stress of expectations from your PI, expectations from your program, and as well as your thesis committee. So are there any tips that the two of y'all have, or anyone else, to deal with these sort of mental roller coasters that grad students usually go through?
Aakanksha, do you want to start?
Okay, I can. So Rohit sir mentioned, right, it is mentally tough. I'm sure even masters can be tough because you're away from home. That's just a big stressor. And then on top of that, everything is unknown. There's no end to it, especially PhD. Sorry. Yeah, so things can get tough. There are many times, especially when papers don't get accepted or don't even get reviewed, or you're not selected for a talk. It can get tough. I have myself thought many times that I will quit. And there was a time where my paper was rejected by 3 journals in 1 week. And then I was like, okay, I'm not cut out for this. People say people are cut out for this. Maybe it's not me. I'm being stubborn. Time to quit. And then like for a week, maybe I thought about, so first of all, you go for like, if you want therapy, talk to, or if you want like professional help, personal support, like build a support system. And be open to failure, be open to ideas if someone has anything, but in the end make a personal decision. So for me, uh, uh, for a week I kind of explored, okay, what else can I do? And there are a lot of things you can do. You could, like Rohit sir mentioned, you can be a consultant, you can go to industry, still do research and all of that. And just the thought of not being in academia made me so much sadder that I was like, okay, I'm just stuck with this. So it's kind of almost an abusive relationship to be in science. You're stuck. Once you're in love, and then just deal with it. So that's my approach. It's slightly sadistic, but that's where I am right now.
So I do just want to make it clear that I hope that everyone understands that PhDs are like a very personal experience. So like our experiences might not be the same as like, for anyone else. Like, no two PhDs are same. So like we'll just give you an idea of like what we went through and what we told, but like that doesn't mean that you will probably go through the same, or like, you whatever we advise you can help you through also. But like, as Aakanksha said, like one is like, so I know that like a lot of universities actually are now coming up with support systems where they help like, people have access to therapy and like, other mental health resources. That's one. And then, as she said, like, support systems are very important. Like, I had a group of friends over here, actually like a decent group of friends from NIT Warangal itself, like, who still stuck with me. Like, I remember them asking me like literally every day the last year of my PhD, like, how are you doing, how are things going, do you need to talk? So that kind of like, you definitely want to have that. Then it is, I think, like, taking a break is fine. Like, if you ever feel the need to like, de-stress, like that is, I think that is kind of important. Like, that many people miss that, is that like, just because you're under stress doesn't mean that you have to take more stress and like, get out of it. You can get out of it by like, not like, taking a break and de-stressing for a minute. And I think it does eventually come down to your relationship with your PI and like, your lab members. So choosing, like, those are situations that you will have to decide at that time, I guess, like, more like, but in general, like, what we see is that labs that are well established are a little less stressful compared to, say, like a lab being run by an assistant prof who's trying to get a tenure in like a couple of years or something. So they want to publish more data, like, they want to get more stuff out, and also like, that might be a little more of a stressful environment compared to like a prof. Like, I think, like, I sometimes do think that like my PhD was took that long because my prof was a little too chill. Like, so it's all like a give and take thing. Like, you will benefit in one side, but then like, there's also like a drawback for it. So it eventually decide. But like, yes, like, having a support system is, I think, the most key point.
Thank you. The floor is open to other questions. We have 6 more minutes for questions until the session is yes. Simran, you have a question.
Hi. Thank you both for the amazing talk. I think it was really helpful, and especially for the people who are like me, considering for like applying for PhD right now. So my question is, there are two types of labs when it comes to choosing for PhD for me. If should I go for a big lab where it's established and it's nice, or a small lab where I'll have like more one-to-one supervision from the PI and stuff? So what is your take on that?
Uh, should I start? Okay. Yeah, that's like one thing when you're looking for labs, everyone's like, just make sure if you want a small lab or a big lab. And still I think it's a very gray area. I went to a very small lab, which like I was the only graduate student when I started, and when I left, there were 7 graduate students. So it's so fluid. I I don't know. I never really like there are these formula that people will tell you like small lab, big lab, well financed or not well financed. Then will they have what kind of project? Like it does not. For me, I just always go with my gut feeling. If you go to a lab, you talk to the guy, you talk to people, and you feel like you belong there, then you belong there. Then it does not matter because many times it'll be a small lab, but you will never want to even talk to your PI. And it'll be a big lab, and there'll be a postdoc who's helping you out so much that you have a support system, even though your boss is busy. So that's why these rotations are important. And I ended up doing only 2 rotations, but like Rohit said, did 4. And I think that's one thing that I would have changed. I would have done even more rotations. Like take as much time as you need to explore. There are all these things to keep in mind just to orient yourself, like parameters to follow. But yeah, there's no perfect answer. That's what I feel.
So I would say that like, so if it is like too young of a lab where like, you're getting started, right, there's going to be like you can essentially like make that lab your own, like when you start. So that's the advantage that you get over there. But then, like, there's also that, like, you will need to establish most of the things from scratch. So that was kind of a dilemma that I had at the end of my 4 rotations, where I either had a lab that had been established for like 30 odd years, like everything was known, and then there was this lab that had just began, like it had only 2 grad students, and like most of the projects had to be set up now and all. So I went with the other one, just because like I felt like better up with it. But I would say, like, so when it comes to that, like, I would probably put the count, like, cut off at probably like 15. Like, so there were a few labs in our department where, like, there's this one particular lab which had like 40 members. Like, so that prof was like too heavily funded X-ray crystallography lab, just 40 members, where like most of the students complained about not having like any one-on-one time at all. So it is all right, like, if you want to join a big lab, but like, don't join a lab where, like, you have to fight for a time, face time with your prof. So like a decent sized lab is good, but then, like, as Aakanksha pointed out, it is probably something that you'll need to figure out at that. I think the number of people in the lab will like become a factor only once it is actually above 15, probably. Like, before that, I think more or less like all the labs are kind of so, as long as you can build a rapport with at least like 2 to 3 lab members, you should be good.
That brings me to another question. So, what do you prefer, direct application to a project for PhD or a program where you could rotate? Because, for example, in Europe, usually you have, openings for a project and then you apply for that particular project for your PhD, versus in the US or in maybe some programs in Europe where you can rotate. So, both of you talked about your rotations. So, what is your take on that?
Go ahead, Aakanksha.
Oh, I mean, I just want to say I was too stupid to even pick a project. I had no understanding of how to judge a project by an abstract or by a title. I knew I cannot do it, so I could not commit to a project. So I applied to one program in Germany, and that was also just a program. It was not commitment to a project. But I don't know, maybe people know what they want to do, and then maybe they can pick a project. I had no idea. And the project changes. I mean, in US at least, right? Like they said I'll work on this, and then it died in 6 months, and then I ended up doing something else. So I like that better.
Yeah, so even for me, I think the idea of rotations was like far better than like going for, like, I think when I was applying for UC Berkeley, it was a similar thing, like where you had to actually choose the lab to which you are applying for. But it is kind of restrictive then, because then, like, even if you're applying for a, say, a particular project, then you are like more or less committing to that project. Whereas, like, I think so, funnily enough for me, like, I hated genetics when I was actually at NIT Warangal. And like both of my projects in CCMB and TIFR were like biophysics projects. So I thought, I was sure that like the reason why I even applied to A&M was there was this prof called Nick Pace whose like papers I had read throughout those 2 internships. But then eventually when I came there, like I did rotations in actually 3 biophysics labs and 1 classical genetics lab, and actually joined the classical genetics lab eventually. So I think being open-minded is like, will definitely help you. So like, if I had to choose between like going for rotations versus going for a, like, apply for a project, I would probably go for the rotations.
And
Okay.
just one more thing, like for PhD, like eventually I got to conceptualize my own project. If someone else has done it for you, the fun part is over. And you're running experiments, which is the worst part. So that's another thing. I wanted to come up with my own thing and try it out. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Daksh, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks both for the wonderful session. It was very informative. So my question is might sound a bit silly, but the last 4 years in US has not been a very great time geopolitical wise. So asking, since both of you are from the ground level, have there been any effects on research environment in USA? Because people have been like the few of my friends I've talked with, and we sort of agree that Europe is a more stable option for the long run. Is that your opinion as well, or like should I keep USA in consideration still?
Um, I'll say something, and then Rohit sir definitely has many things to say about that. I think that is the biggest downside of coming to US is the immigration problem. It takes years to get out of it, and it's a lot of stress for you, for your family. You cannot make any decisions. So yeah, if there is one problem here, it is immigration. You and like Rohit sir, I also ended up. I had four postdoc offers, and I liked all four, and I could have honestly like who will give me H1 was definitely a big consideration because then like there's like ripple effect, then my husband, and then like how does that work out, and my family, how can I get on green card, like everything like starts becoming a problem. And so imagine making a decision based on who gives you a visa, right? Like you don't want that, and that happens. So and then the whole 221G, when you can travel to India, things happen in India and you cannot go, and that honestly added too much more of the stress than failure in PhD. Like things are happening and you're not there for your family, and that's an immigration issue. So maybe things will get better, but I don't think too much. We will until you're on green card, it's an ongoing issue. So maybe when you pick labs or pick programs, pick something that's more friendly to immigrants. But that is a downside you need to be aware of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so that whole immigration thing I think has been like a drawback for US like from the beginning, in general, like where you have to figure out all these visa issues at almost each and every step of your like career progression. So that is a issue, but like so in terms of research, I don't think like it affects that much. Like most of the research work and all, like once you're in the system, until that next move, like you're good, so that shouldn't really be that much of a problem. Um but yeah, I think like I do not know much about how stable or secure Europe is, in also because I think in the UK or somewhere, like, you can't be unemployed for so and so number of days, and like you have to definitely get out unless you have a job. Those kind of issues might be around. But again, like this is on Facebook Live, and I'm a federal employee. I can't say much about the US government anywhere. So yeah, I think I'll leave my comments to that level. Yeah.
And I just want to add one more
Uh,
thing. There are all these internships in US like Corona, and they're very definitely competitive and elite. But there is a visa issue there too. I know some people who went for Corona and then they come on J1 and then they have to be on J1 after PhD. Like it follows you everywhere. So if you like those people told me if they can go back, they would have just gone to Germany or UK or Canada instead of coming to US, even though that really helped them get into programs. So every time you plan to come to US, even on B1, B2, like as a tourist, just make sure it does not affect anything in the like it just follows you. So just be aware, talk to people.
cool. Thanks for the heads up, guys. Thanks for the answer.
So there was a question in the chat by Nandini, which asked, did you all ever feel like you all missed out by not doing a master's and going directly for a PhD?
For me, I don't think I did. I got into the program I liked and I ended up doing the research I wanted to do. But like Rohit sir said, if you are not able to get into like a really good university because you're coming from India, there's always shortcomings. Then doing a master's would really help you propel, right? Like it'll open up Berkeley, UCSD, Harvard, Stanford, everything for you once you have a master's. So that might be, but I ended up in a decent program. So
Yeah, so I didn't feel like I missed out on anything, but like it's I think it comes down to that like competition level at where you're at, because like if you have done a master's, there's a good like you definitely probably have like a year or more of research experience, and then there is a decent chance that you might have even got a publication out of it. So like when you're directly applying to PhD after your BTech, you're also competing with those kind of students. So getting into good programs is going to be a little tough. And luckily, I also got into A&M. But like if you are like of the kind where you think that like actually getting into this reputable program is a really important deal for you, then yeah, like probably applying for a master's program at a that's at a lesser competitive level, coming here, getting all that experience will definitely help you. But I don't think so, at least in terms of what do you say, employability. I think masters doesn't change anything from what I have seen in the US. A masters doesn't really change anything in terms of your employability. I don't think PhD also changes that much, but still, like I think definitely
It reduces your
masters.
employability. If you want to be employed, don't do a PhD.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we have run out of time almost. So if there are any further questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can discuss them further with our speakers during our breakout session after the next set of speakers. With that, I would like to thank both the speakers for sharing their experiences and giving us so much insight into academic research in the US.